Ethiopia's northern Tigray region is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. There have been reports of massacres, rapes, and widespread hunger. Millions have been displaced and thousands killed since the fighting began in November last year. The United Nations says more than 350,000 people in the conflict-torn region are living in famine conditions. Thousands of children are severely malnourished and at risk of dying. Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers have also been accused of using rape and other forms of sexual violence as a weapon of war. For more on this, I want to bring in Lynsey Addario. She is a photojournalist and recently went to Ethiopia to cover this crisis. And we want to warn our viewers that the reality of the situation is disturbing, and some of the images you're about to see are graphic. Lynsey, what did you witness in the Tigray region?
Well, all across the areas I was able to access, there are women who recount stories of having been raped, gang raped, held as sex slaves in military camps. There are civilians being shot and sometimes killed in crossfire. I witnessed people who can't get access to food distributions, humanitarian agencies who can't get food to certain areas, children who are severely malnourished. Hospitals that have been looted with from all of their equipment. So it's pretty dire.
Lynsey, as I mentioned, all sides of the conflict have been accused of using rape as a weapon of war. You photographed and spoke with several women who had been raped, and I want to show our viewers a photo you took of a teenager named Rahel. Could you tell us about her story?
When I met Rahel, she was in a hospital. She was about 5 months pregnant and awaiting an abortion because she had been gang raped in November by 3 different soldiers as she was trying to make her way back home when the conflict started. And she was so traumatized. Of course, it's a very delicate balance to talk to a woman or anyone who has been assaulted after this. And she said how when she went home to her mother and she realized at some point that she was pregnant, she told her mother she might be pregnant and that what had happened to her. And her mother said, "How can you have the baby of these killers?" and kicked her out of the house. And she was able to go to her aunt's house, who advised her to then terminate the pregnancy. And when I met her, she was being treated by Doctors Without Borders, and she was in a hospital in Abyei.
And she was just 19. Children have obviously been casualties of this crisis. Tell us more about how this war has affected the children there.
I'll just continue a little bit more. She was 19, but I interviewed 9 women, some women as old as 80 years old. So there is no limit to the assault that's going on women. And I think that there will be hundreds, if not thousands, who are traumatized and dealing with unwanted pregnancies and the abuse that they suffered. As far as children are concerned, I saw children who are severely malnourished, people who cannot get access to food, people who have been in hiding in the mountains and caves away from their villages because they're so terrified of being attacked again. Some people make a quick journey back to their homes, try to get what they can in terms of nourishment, and then go back into the mountains or the caves. So the people I saw are the people who were actually able to make it to a medical facility. I can't imagine how many people are still in hiding and still haven't been able to make it to help.
Now, the Ethiopian government says that aid is being delivered to people in need of food, and they deny reports of a famine in Tigray. It sounds like, from your reporting, that doesn't match up with what you've seen.
Well, I think the Ethiopian government has been pretty strategic about not letting journalists into Tigray. I actually was working on a climate change story for National Geographic. I didn't anticipate going to Tigray, but there is a climate change issue there. And when I did get permission, of course, I started asking questions. And what I found was sort of across the board human rights abuses, a humanitarian crisis. For me, I'm a conflict photographer. I've been doing this over 20 years. I can't obviously not report things that I see. So it's interesting to me to see the sort of the denial on the part of the Ethiopian government, but also on the part of Ethiopians who say, women are acting that they were raped, they're pretending they were raped, or this isn't really happening. Well, actually, there's proof. These people, one woman I interviewed, for example, she was so inconsolable that she just basically wept and howled for about 10 straight minutes when I asked her about what had happened to her. So this is, in fact, happening. It's very difficult to get access to it because, the Ethiopian government knows journalists will tell the international community. And now people like me have done our job, and it's in the hands of policymakers to deal with this.
And Lynsey, as you said, that there are hundreds of thousands of people that have fled, left the region. Tell us more about where they've gone and what's happening to them.
Most people are still in the region, but they're in Mekelle, which is the capital of Tigray, which is very safe right now. There are schools for displaced. Most of the schools in Mekelle, as well as in different parts of Tigray, are being used as to shelter internally displaced people. And I visited several of those. Some people have fled to Sudan, so they fled across borders. So there are people who have been displaced both out of the region and also within Tigray.
Lynsey, I really appreciate what you said about your responsibility to document what's happening there and that now it's in the hands of others to take action. Are other countries or outside groups trying enough? Are they doing enough to help the people in Tigray? How successful have these efforts been, and what more needs to be done from your firsthand perspective?
I think one of the most difficult things is that there is very little access. So there's very little information coming out from Tigray. So I think in general, the international community has been pretty overwhelmed with COVID and this new Delta strain of the coronavirus. I think their attention has been on other things lately. And so when you have a conflict where the government makes it almost impossible to access, the international community is also having a difficult time accessing. And they're also scared of being kicked out and not being able to serve the people of Tigray. So they're being they're not sort of speaking on the record very much. I think you have a situation where it makes it almost easier for the international community to turn a blind eye because there's so little information and there are so many other issues in terms of COVID and everything else going on. So I think, as far as I know, there are countries who are starting to motivate, who are taking the information of networks and also the journalists who have gotten inside. The New York Times had a journalist kicked out of Ethiopia. So I think it's time to actually take a look at why there's so much censorship going on there.
Lynsey Addario, thank you so much for joining us and for not turning a blind eye.
Thank you.